sign the deed over to your brother, or I tell your firm you've been hiding a conflict of interest for 3 years. That was the voicemail my uncle left me. Not a text this time, a voicemail, so I couldn't screenshot it easily, so I'd have to listen to his voice crack with the effort of threatening his own niece. 41 seconds. I played it twice. Then I opened my notes app and typed the timestamp. I'm 31 years old. I'm a real estate attorney at a mid-sized firm in Portland, Oregon, and I have spent the last 6 years learning exactly how property fraud works, how title theft happens, how forged deeds get recorded at county offices by people who think no one is paying attention. My uncle apparently did not think about any of that before he called me. My grandmother passed in February. She was 83, sharp until the very end, the kind of woman who kept a legal pad next to her phone and wrote down everything anyone ever said to her in a conversation that involved money. She had a house in Beaverton, 3 bedrooms, paid off, worth about $480,000 in the current market. She also had a will. I had seen it. I had actually helped her update it 2 years before she died. Sitting at her kitchen table while she ate a bowl of tomatoes and told me exactly what she wanted. The house was to be split equally between her 3 living children, my mother, my uncle, and my aunt who lives in Tucson, equal thirds. That was what she wanted. That was what she signed. My uncle had other ideas. I found out the way you find out about most things in this family, not directly, not cleanly, but through a side door. My cousin texted me a photo. She didn't even add a message, just sent it and then went offline. It was a screenshot of a county recorder filing, a deed of transfer. My grandmother's house, transferred in full to my uncle, dated 3 weeks before she died. I stared at the photo for a long time. I was standing in my kitchen, and I remember I had a mug of coffee in my hand that I never drank. It went completely cold. The signature at the bottom was my grandmother's name. The handwriting was not my grandmother's handwriting. I know her handwriting. She signed birthday cards in this very particular looping cursive, with a small flourish on the capital E of her name, a habit she'd had since Catholic school in 1958. The signature on that deed was flat. The letters didn't connect the way hers did. The notary stamp was from a name I didn't recognize, a name that didn't appear in the Oregon Notary Public Database when I searched it 11 minutes later. I set the mug down on the counter. I did not call my uncle. I did not call my mother. I opened my laptop and I started pulling the public record. My uncle. I'll call him what he was, which is the man my grandmother trusted most in her final years. The one who drove her to doctor's appointments and brought her groceries and positioned himself as her primary caretaker specifically so that the rest of us would feel guilty asking too many questions. He had been planning this for longer than I wanted to admit. The deed was filed with a notary stamp that didn't match any active commission in the state of Oregon. The transfer had bypassed probate entirely, and my grandmother's actual will, the one I had helped her draft, had never been submitted for probate. That last part is important. When someone dies with a will in Oregon, the executor is supposed to file it with the probate court within a reasonable time. My uncle was named executor. He had done nothing. He was sitting on a forged deed and a buried will, waiting for time and grief to do the rest of the work for him. What he didn't know, what he had apparently not thought through at any point, was that I do this for a living. I spent 3 days pulling everything quietly. I requested a certified copy of the deed from Washington County. I pulled the notary commission records from the Oregon Secretary of State. I located the original will in the file my grandmother had given me for safekeeping. She had given me a copy, sealed in an envelope, 2 years before she died. She said, very simply, keep this somewhere safe, just in case. I had kept it in a fireproof box in my home office closet. I photographed the envelope, still sealed. I had it notarized, the envelope itself unopened, with a notary confirming the date it was received and the intact seal. Then I opened it and had the contents notarized as well. Every step logged, every document in order. Then I called the Oregon Department of Justice's Financial Fraud Unit, not the local police, the DOJ, because deed fraud in Oregon is a Class C felony and can escalate to a Class B depending on the property value and the nature of the forgery. $480,000 tips that scale considerably. The investigator I spoke to was calm and methodical. She asked me to send everything digitally and to retain all originals. I told her I had already organized them chronologically in a labeled accordion folder. There was a brief silence on the phone, and then she said, "You're an attorney, aren't you?" It wasn't really a question. All of this took 72 hours. My uncle had no idea any of it was happening. He thought I was grieving. He thought I was busy with work. He thought I was the niece who sent flowers and cried at the service and would eventually call him to ask about Thanksgiving because that's what I had always done. I had always been the one who kept the peace, smoothed the edges, showed up with food when something went wrong, and left before anyone had to thank me. That history, that's the part I need to explain because otherwise none of this makes sense. My grandmother had 4 grandchildren. I was the oldest. From the time I was about 12, I understood implicitly that my role in this family was to be reliable. Not celebrated, reliable. I was the one who called on birthdays, who remembered my aunt's food allergies, who showed up to drive my cousin to the airport at 4 a.m. without being asked twice. Nobody really acknowledged it. It was just expected, the way the foundation of a house is expected to hold weight without anyone thinking much about it. My uncle's son, my cousin, the one everyone adored, the one my grandmother called her wild boy, with this particular kind of fond exasperation, was the family's investment piece. Every mess he made was cleaned up before it could touch him. When he crashed his car at 19, my uncle called my mother and my mother called me, and somehow I ended up lending $3,000 that was never repaid to a cousin who didn't even know I'd contributed because my uncle had collected from 3 different people and told none of us about the others. When my cousin got fired from his second job in a year, the family had a conversation about how his real talent was being wasted, how the corporate world just didn't understand him. Nobody had that conversation when I worked doubles for 8 months to pay off my bar exam costs without asking anyone for anything. I didn't resent it, or I told myself I didn't. I told myself I was just built differently. I told myself being the steady one was its own kind of worth. What I understand now is that I had confused being used with being loved. They are not the same thing. Not even close. The voicemail came on a Wednesday evening. I had just gotten home from a deposition that ran 2 hours over, and I was standing in my hallway still in my coat when I played it. My uncle's voice, doing that thing it does when he's performing calm over actual panic. A controlled flatness that's been his tell since I was a kid. He had found out I'd requested the certified deed copy. Someone at the county office had apparently mentioned it. I don't know who, I don't know the specific mechanism, but it doesn't matter. He knew I was looking. And instead of calling to explain, instead of reaching out to have any kind of honest conversation, his first move was a threat. Sign the deed over to your brother. My brother has nothing to do with any of this, which told me immediately that my uncle was panicking and improvising. He'd grabbed the nearest lever he could think of. Or I tell your firm, you've been hiding a conflict of interest for 3 years. There's no conflict of interest. I disclosed my grandmother's estate to my firm's ethics coordinator the week she passed. It's in writing, date-stamped, filed in HR. I had done it proactively and specifically because I knew this family was complicated and I wanted no ambiguity. My uncle didn't know I'd done that. He was betting that I hadn't, betting that the threat of a bar complaint would make me fold the same way the threat of family disappointment had always made me fold. He was 3 years too late and 1 disclosure form too slow. I didn't call him back. I listened to the voicemail a second time, this time with a recording app running on my phone. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which means I can record any conversation I'm a party to, and playing a voicemail while recording qualifies. I saved the file. I emailed it to myself into a secure cloud backup. Then I did something I had been doing a lot of those past 3 weeks. I sat down in the quiet of my apartment and I let myself actually feel it. There's a version of this story where I'm completely cold and tactical the whole way through, where I never waver, where the professional part of my brain just takes over and executes. That's not what happened. What happened is that I sat on my kitchen floor, not on the chair, on the floor with my back against the cabinets, and I cried for about 20 minutes. Not because I was scared, because I was tired. I was tired in the way you get tired when you finally stop pretending something doesn't hurt. I thought about my grandmother at her kitchen table, the legal pad, the bowl of tomatoes. I thought about how she'd looked at me when she handed me that envelope and said, "Keep this somewhere safe." I think she knew. I think she understood in the particular way that perceptive older women understand things without saying them directly, that someone in her family might try to rewrite the story after she was gone. She gave the envelope to me, not to my mother, not to anyone else. She gave it to me because she knew I would know what to do with it. I got up off the floor. I washed my face. I made tea. And then I thought about what my uncle didn't know. He didn't know about the envelope. He didn't know about the DOJ referral. He didn't know about the Notary Commission database search or the certified copies, or the quiet conversation I'd had with an estate litigation colleague 3 states away who owed me a favor and had spent 40 minutes on the phone with me walking through the strongest approach for challenging a fraudulent deed in Oregon probate court. But there was one more thing he didn't know. My grandmother, in the last year of her life, had become close with her neighbor, a retired woman named something I'll just describe as a very observant person in her late 70s who had nothing to do all day but pay attention. She had been there the day someone came to get my grandmother's signature on a document. She remembered it because my grandmother had seemed confused afterward and had knocked on her neighbor's door and asked her to come in for coffee, which she sometimes did when she was unsettled. The neighbor had asked if everything was okay. My grandmother had said, "I think I signed something I shouldn't have." The neighbor had written it down in a small green notebook she kept on her kitchen counter where she logged things she observed in the neighborhood. Date, time, brief description. I know about the notebook because the neighbor had called my mother after the funeral, and my mother had mentioned it to me offhandedly, not understanding what it meant. I understood what it meant. I drove to Beaverton on a Saturday morning. I brought coffee and a box of pastries. I sat at the neighbor's kitchen table for 2 hours. She showed me the notebook. The entry was dated, time-stamped, and specific. I asked if I could have a certified copy made. She said she'd rather come in person and say it herself. That was when I knew the probate petition was going to hold. I filed the petition the following Tuesday. My firm was aware. I had brought in a colleague to formally handle the litigation, so there would be no question of my involvement being inappropriate, and I supported the case as a resource rather than lead counsel. The filing included the certified original deed, the disputed deed with the mismatched notary, the sealed envelope with my grandmother's will, the notarized record of the envelope's chain of custody, and a sworn statement from the neighbor. My uncle was served at his house on a Thursday afternoon. I know what he did when he got the papers because his wife called my mother, who called me. Apparently, he sat very still for a long time and then said, "She was never supposed to do this. Not I didn't do it. Not this is a mistake. She was never supposed to do this." Which tells you everything. His attorney called my colleague the next day and floated the word settlement. My colleague said she'd pass it along. We didn't respond for a week. There's a reason for that. Not cruelty, not gamesmanship, but because in estate fraud cases, the documentary record is so much stronger when you let the other side sit with it long enough to understand that you have everything. A settlement conversation that happens in week 2 is worth considerably less than one that happens after they've had time to review what you've actually filed. During that week, my uncle called me twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. The messages were different in tone from the first one. The flatness was gone. The first message was mostly silence, with some throat clearing and then him saying my name and then hanging up. The second one, he said he wanted to explain that things weren't what they look like, that my grandmother had been confused about what she wanted at the end. He said it had been a stressful time for everyone. I saved both voicemails. I did not respond. The settlement that was eventually reached returned the house to the estate to be distributed according to the actual will. My uncle's legal costs were substantial. The DOJ investigation remained open, separate from the civil matter. That's not something a civil settlement can close, which his attorney had apparently not made fully clear to him before he agreed to terms. I wasn't involved in the DOJ process after my initial referral. I don't know exactly where it stands now, and I don't need to. My mother cried when she found out everything. Not the controlled, formal crying of a funeral, but the kind that comes from finding out that someone you trusted has been lying to your face, that the version of the family you thought you were in doesn't quite match the actual one. She said she was sorry, I told her she didn't need to apologize because she didn't do anything wrong. She said I should have been paying attention. I didn't argue with that because she's not wrong. My aunt in Tucson sent me a text that said, "I always knew." 3 words. I appreciated the honesty of it. My cousin, the one who had sent me the original photograph, the one who started this whole chain, told me later that she had known for months and hadn't known what to do with what she knew. I think about that sometimes. How many people in a family are holding information they don't know how to act on, waiting for someone else to be the one who does something? I don't say that with judgment. I wasn't always the person who did something either. For a long time, I was the person who smoothed things over and absorbed the cost and called it being a good family member. I moved in March, not because I had to. Portland was still my city, my firm, my life. But because I had been renting the same apartment for 4 years, partly out of inertia and partly, if I'm honest, because moving felt like a statement and I had spent a long time trying not to make statements. I found a place closer to the river. The first weekend I was there, I went to a farmer's market down the street and bought herbs for a window box and spent an afternoon planting them and didn't think about any of it for several hours. There's a particular kind of quiet that exists on the other side of a thing like this. Not peaceful exactly, not right away. More like the silence after a very long noise finally stops and you're still not sure if you trust it. I trust it now. My grandmother gave me that envelope 2 years before she died. She wrote my name on the outside in her looping cursive, with the small flourish on the capital E. She chose me. Not because I was the lawyer. She didn't need a lawyer. She needed someone who would pay attention and not look away when it mattered. I have the envelope still. I kept it even after the contents were filed and copied and entered into evidence. It sits in the same fireproof box in the closet of my new apartment, which is unnecessary and probably slightly irrational, and I don't care. Some things you keep not because you need them, but because they're proof, not for a courtroom, just for yourself, that someone saw you clearly and trusted what they saw. The thing I keep coming back to is the envelope. Not the court filing, not the settlement, not the DOJ case number, the envelope. My grandmother sealed it, wrote my name on the outside, and handed it to me at her kitchen table like it was nothing, like she was passing me a recipe. She didn't explain why she chose me and not one of her own children. She just looked at me for a moment longer than usual and then asked if I wanted more tea. I think about what it takes to do what she did. To see clearly, at 81, which people in your life will actually hold something carefully. She had watched me for 30 years. She drew a conclusion. And the conclusion she drew was that I would know what to do when the time came. Not because I was the loudest or the most aggressive or the most obviously fierce, but because I was the one who paid attention and didn't flinch. That's the first thing I want to say about this, even though I'm still figuring out how to say it. Being the steady one is not the same as being the passive one. For a long time, I confused those two things. I thought that keeping the peace, absorbing the friction, showing up without asking for acknowledgement, I thought that was goodness, and some of it was. But some of it was also just fear, dressed up as virtue. Fear of being called selfish, fear of making the situation worse, fear that if I stopped smoothing things over, the whole structure would crack and somehow that would be my fault. My uncle counted on that fear. He had counted on it for years, and it had worked. It worked until it didn't. What changed wasn't that I got angry, though I did. What changed was that I got honest with myself, first, before anyone else. I sat on my kitchen floor and I let myself actually name what had happened. Someone I was supposed to be able to trust had looked at a document my grandmother signed in good faith and decided to replace it with a lie. And then, when he thought I was getting close, his first move was to threaten the thing I had worked hardest to build. Not a conversation. Not an explanation. A threat. There's a clarity that comes with that. It's not comfortable clarity. It doesn't feel like relief. Not at first. It feels more like the moment your eyes adjust in a dark room and you finally see the shape of things as they actually are. Not as you'd been telling yourself they were. What I did next wasn't brave in any dramatic sense. I had the skills, I had the documents, I had the tools. I used them. I was methodical because that's who I am, and being methodical is its own form of courage. Not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that shows up at 11 p.m. and organizes an accordion folder and makes sure every single page is dated and in order because you understand that truth, on its own, is not enough. Truth has to be legible. Truth has to be documented. Truth has to be walked through a door in a form that cannot be easily dismissed. My grandmother understood something about character that I'm still learning. She understood that the people worth trusting are not the ones who make the most noise about being trustworthy. They're the ones who are still there, still paying attention, still doing the quiet, unglamorous work when nobody is watching and nobody is clapping. She kept a legal pad by her phone. Her neighbor kept a green notebook on her kitchen counter. Two women, separately, writing things down because they understood that the record matters, that what actually happened matters, even when someone with more power is working very hard to replace it with a more convenient version. I still have the envelope. The seal is broken now. The contents are filed in a county probate court, duplicated in 3 secure locations, entered into the record. But I kept the envelope because my name is on it in her handwriting, with a small flourish on the capital E, and because some things you keep not as evidence but as a reminder. Someone saw you clearly once and trusted what they saw, and that is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything.